This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us. We are joined by Senator George Runner. He is a member of the Board of Equalization, representing 1/4 of California, 65% of its land area. Wow.
It's a big place.
It's a big place, no doubt. And I want to talk about taxes in California, which some say are too big.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what you have called, and we've heard it called before, Tax Freedom Day.
Well, I have the privilege of being elected. California is the only state that has an elected tax board.
Right, that's true.
And so, I represent 1/4 of the population of the state of California, and I really get to be their taxpayer advocate.
Right.
And one of the things that concerns us is the tax burden level that's on Californians. And so one of the ways that that's measured by one Washington organization is they celebrate what's called Tax Freedom Day. And for across America, that happened on April 18th.
And it's kind of ironic that it happens right around the time that our taxes are due.
I think last year is actually on tax day.
That's interesting.
But what that means is, and what they say is, they take the total amount of taxes that people pay, and they basically say if you were to pay them all up front, you would be paid up by April 18th. Right. The rest of the year, now you're earning money for yourself. Now, unfortunately, it's not that way in California. Californians had to work extra days. In fact, they had to go to April 24th before they could actually then start spending their own money.
How does that compare to other states?
Well, unfortunately, there's only 5 other states that have a later tax day than Tax Freedom Day than California. And they're the typical big states, we'd think of that have kind of high
Northeast.
Taxes. Yeah, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Illinois. And so California is right there. And unfortunately, California moved up on the list because of some higher tax burden. And I'll tell you, that doesn't look good for taxpayers in the future, because all you got to do is look across the street here from where we're recording this, the state capitol, and see that there's a lot of bills right now to actually increase taxes even more.
Really? Even in the wake of the fact that Prop 30 passed and the governor seems to suggest that we're fine for now, more revenues coming in. There may be some Democrats on the Hill that are looking to make some waves with taxes, but the governor does
It'll be very interesting, because what you're seeing there is, yes, certainly governor said, hey, slow down. California's already passed this. Let's wait and see what happens. It'll be interesting to see what happens when some of those land on his desk, and I'm confident they're going to.
But at the same time, I do want to get a sense from you. Yes, our tax burden, according to the Tax Foundation, is higher than most states, but do we get a benefit from that? That's really the question.
I guess the Californians are going to have to answer that themselves. How do they feel about their kids' school? How do they feel about the roads that they drive on?
Right. Well, how would we compare, I hate to do this, to Texas, for example? I mean, we're so often compared to Texas. And when you compare us, obviously their tax burden is much lower, but one could argue they don't get the same level of service.
Well, I don't know. I think, I believe, for instance, per pupil spending is not a lot different. Our per pupil spending is in the.
But
again, but what you're saying, what we're saying is the tax burden is lower in Texas, but yet they have almost equal, if not even a little bit more, per pupil spending.
Right.
So the question is, how much money? Where does taxpayers' money go? And I think that's the real question for taxpayers, and that is, taxpayers may say, hey, look, if I'm getting value for my taxes and I'm getting benefit, then that's an investment I'm willing to make. I think California is going to have to say, gee, do I feel that way about California?
And what's interesting is the way California taxes. We've talked about this countless times. We rely so much on income tax and so much on higher income tax earners. I mean, we've talked about tax reform. Is there a legitimate possibility we can see it?
I think there could be. I'm just not optimistic about it, because I think given our state, and given the fact that more liberals control policy than I think conservatives or moderates do, I think what will happen is when you see tax reform, it's another way to get tax increase.
We'll talk more about it when we come back. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. I want to talk with you about a specific tax, and that is what's known as the fire fee.
Yeah.
Give us some background, without a bias, if I may say.
Again, I do have a bias.
I know. We'll get to the bias in a second.
Let's go to the history of it.
Yeah, the history.
What happened is California was looking to balance its budget a couple of years ago. And so one of the ways that it went to balance its budget is it cut some programs out of certain state programs, and one of them was CAL FIRE and their fire prevention programs. So they cut money to CAL FIRE, and then what they did is they said, well, we're going to get you money back, but what we're going to do is we're going to charge an extra fee or tax to people who live in certain areas in California. And so what they did is they did that. And that program then was to raise about $80 million, which was to backfill the cut that was made to CAL FIRE?
So there are two parts to that. And we'll start with one part, which is what we know as Prop 26. Prop 26, as I understand it, requires that fees be passed by a 2/3 majority. The fire fee, as I understand it, was passed with a 50% majority.
Right, and actually this really didn't deal much with that proposition because they believe, I mean, I think the lawsuit that's happening there isn't that it was a fee at all, it was really a tax.
Right.
So the fundamental issue is, did you pass a tax, and that's what the lawsuit's about, with a simple majority vote bill as opposed to 2/3. And so there's a lot of concern for that.
But it really begs the question, tax or fee, however you define it, the Constitution seems clear.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I don't want to take a position.
No,
but,
well,
yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's an illegal tax or fee at that point. But the point would be, I think it's also bad policy. You don't go ahead around and then start charging people for their services, which they believe and I believe are part of their basic services that they pay their taxes for.
So that also begs the question. You know, for those, for example, if you live in a flood zone, you'll have to pay more insurance. If you live in a fire zone, you may have to pay more insurance. So what this bill or this fee just tries to do is put a greater burden, arguably, on those that choose to live in areas that are at higher risk for fire. You somewhat answer the question.
Somewhat answer it that way. Yeah. The problem is that actually, when we fight fires out in the hills and out in the mountains of California, whether people live there or not, we don't fight them to protect houses. We fight them to protect the watershed that comes off of those mountains. That watershed isn't for the people who live in the mountains. That watershed that we're fighting those fires for are for people who live in the cities. And so in one sense, we're holding the people who live in those communities responsible for a resource protection that's actually there for the cities.
At the same time, there have been a variety of bills to repeal the fire fee. There's one bill that I think is interesting. I want to get your sense. It's been proposed by Assemblyman Wes Chesbrough, who represents a fairly rural area of the state. And what he wants to do under his bill is repeal the fire fee, but impose a fee, tax, whatever words you want to use, on all homeowners. I guess it's about $48 a year.
Right.
And the notion is, let's spread the pain, and everyone will have to pay. What's your sense of that?
Well, it's kind of interesting on a couple of levels. Number one, you're trading about an $80 billion revenue for about a $500 million revenue. Okay. And of course, then basically it's to create more programs to backfill some of these issues, and then it's also to provide some other basic programming and opportunities for Californians in terms of public safety. My concern is very simple, and that is, the fact is, public safety should be the #1 priority for government with the taxes that people already pay. We shouldn't be going after them for higher taxes or a extra fee on their home insurance in order to give them something that their basic taxes should be paying for.
But if we need the money, where do we get the money?
You know, California, the problem is that the politicians will always need more money. There will always be. Where California needs to get its money is it needs to get people back to work. When Californians are working and we get away from having the second highest unemployment rate in the nation, then California will have lots of revenue to take care of its programs.
But would you rather, though, have, let's say there is a fire fee, for whatever reason we're going to have it, would it be preferable in your mind to have it apply to all homeowners, or keep it limited to those homeowners that are in allegedly high fire zones?
Well, again, same reason I would oppose a fee on people who are allegedly in high crime areas.
Okay. Good anecdote.
I think that
metaphor.
the fact is that it's a basic role of government to protect its citizens. And that's what we should be doing with their first tax dollar, not their added-on tax dollar.
But what about applying it to everyone?
Well, again, I personally believe that California government is large enough. You don't need to give California government more money. Okay. What you need to do is spend their money better and get people back to work so California has more money because people are working, not because we're taxing people higher.
His name is Senator George Runner, member of the Board of Equalization. My name is Brad Pomerance. You are watching California Edition.
How much will Americans pay in federal and state taxes in 2013? According to the Tax Foundation, Americans will pay $2.76 trillion in federal taxes and $1.45 trillion in state taxes, for a total tax bill of $4.22 trillion.
You're watching California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Glad you're with us. Our guest, Richard Bloom, member of the California State Assembly, a new member. How's your new job?
I'm really loving it, enjoying it up here. I don't much like the commute between Santa Monica, Los Angeles, and Sacramento, and the allergy season has hit me pretty hard.
You had been mayor of Santa Monica. You represent significant portions of western Los Angeles County.
That's correct.
Talk to us about your district, the needs, concerns, desires of your constituents.
Well, the district begins on the beach in Malibu. It travels through Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, West Los Angeles,
Tough
West
communities.
Hollywood.
Yeah, real tough communities, right.
Yep, but some great communities.
No doubt.
A lot of diversity, very good people.
And there's no doubt that the voters in those areas are most in tune to environmental concerns. And
That's certainly one of them.
Right, and interestingly, as you drive through those areas, and also to the east a bit, you will find oil wells, specifically on the mountains above La Cienega Boulevard, for example. And so there's an issue about how oil is being extracted from those areas. And a lot of that extraction is done through what's known as fracking, which is a hydraulic fracturing, a method whereby water and some chemicals are injected into the ground to extract out oil and gas deposits.
Sure. That, of course, is one of the big issues, is exactly what is the composition of the water and the chemicals that are in the water. And oil companies have been very reluctant to release that information. But this is injected into the ground through the bedrock and down into the earth, and then it's slanted over through very, very long lines of pipeline. Then under high pressure, they do what's called this fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, that opens up the, if it's working right, it opens up the area where shale oil exists, and that helps release the oil. It's pumped back up. There are just a whole range of issues that at this point are completely unregulated in the state.
But what's interesting is if you look at the Monterey Shale, as you reference, which is really very significant portions of the entire state of California.
Over 1,700 square miles of the state of California.
If the fracking works as the industry hopes, the amount of oil that California could extract, I mean, when we talk about our dependence on foreign oil, it could vanish.
Yeah,
I mean, there's that much.
The economic incentive and other incentives are certainly there for hydraulic fracking. The issue with fracking is environmental, and we're always weighing the benefit against the costs.
And what's interesting is that fracking is not new. We've been engaged in fracking for decades, but the use of it is increasing. Like you referenced, it's unregulated in California.
The use of it is increasing due to changes in technology. So while fracking has been going on for decades, it's only since 2005, 2006, where these new technologies were developed that allow the process to take place further down into the earth and further away from the drill site, and also using new, very, very protected compounds of chemicals and formulas of chemicals.
And though that begs the question, there have been proposals made. Senator Pavley, who represents similar areas to yours, the governor, Dogger, which is the agency that oversees or should oversee fracking, they've been marching forward. And so the question becomes, should these fracking entities be required to disclose their chemical cocktail? Should they be required to disclose when they're going to frack, before or after the fact? And those are questions I'm going to ask you when we come back. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so very much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back on California Edition. So, Mr. Bloom, should the oil companies be required to disclose the chemicals that they are using in their frack when, admittedly, those chemicals are but a small part of the entire cocktail? It's mostly water.
Well, yes, but these chemicals, which number in the hundreds, it is actually unknown exactly what quantities are used, and many of them are toxic, many of them are carcinogens. The public has a right to know what is being put into the ground. It is then extracted from underground and disposed of in other well sites, in old wells. So the fact of the matter is this process is completely unregulated. every other aspect of oil drilling and oil extraction is highly regulated in the state of California. Other states are looking at this too. This is not simply a case of California looking at something.
What the industry is saying, though, is that the chemical formulas are really trade secrets. And if you're forcing us to disclose it, you're really forcing us to give up our business model. And what they would prefer is they should be only required to disclose if there's a problem. You know, if there's some type of spill or accident. What's your sense of that?
Well, this is an issue that I'm sure can be worked out. I'm absolutely certain of that. What is happening now is that there's a fight going on about just how to do that. And my sense is that there's no end in sight for the bickering and the fighting over this issue. That's why I've proposed a moratorium during which there would be no fracking. That would force everybody to the table. We can start to actually address these regulatory issues, put responsible regulations in place. The formula is not the only issue. There has to be oversight of the drilling process, of the injection process, of the disposal. There are concerns over water quality. There's concerns about air quality. There are multiple environmental, very serious environmental concerns over this practice.
Where is Senator Pavley on this issue of moratorium? Because she really is the voice on the fracking debate in the Senate.
Well, you'd have to ask Senator Pavley
but are you aware of her position because she has been so vocal?
Well, she certainly has. There are 9 bills right now in the legislature, and many of us support one another's bills. So there's some overlap in them. There are, for example, there are 3 bills on moratoriums. I think one of the things that having so many bills points out is the great public interest on this issue. There's interest from within the Assembly, and I can say over just the last 2 weeks, when my bill has been moving forward and has become public, I've received almost 7,000 emails from interested persons supporting the moratorium bill that I'm putting forward. I've been in office now for getting close to 15 years. I've never seen this level of engagement by the public on an issue and an email campaign like this.
I want to talk about another issue, and it deals with the Public Utilities Commission.
Yes.
Recently, Assemblyman Bradford was on our program, and to say he was harsh towards the PUC would only be described as an understatement. He has some serious concerns about how the agency is operating. Do you have similar concerns?
Yeah, there's a lot of concern about the Public Utilities Commission right now, and I think that there's good reason for that. I am the chair of Budget Subcommittee 3 that has oversight over natural resources, and that includes the Public Utilities Commission. This is a commission with a $1.3 billion budget for operations, but that it itself has oversight over, I think, $30 to $40 billion in ratepayer funds. And recently, there have been serious discrepancies that were revealed through audits of the PUC's operations.
And what's unfortunate, assuming those facts are accurate, and I'm taking you at your word, is that this plays into the narrative. You have the Parks Department with some auditing issues, recycling bureaus with auditing issues. I mean, it can be very troublesome as we look towards Sacramento to get their fiscal house in order when we keep seeing these agencies apparently squandering.
Yes, and many of those agencies are under my purview in the subcommittee. And it is important for us to make certain that the public's money is being well spent, that best practices are being utilized by every agency, and that's really my goal, is to make sure that is what's happening.
So in our final moments, is the PUC being responsive to your queries?
Yes, we have demanded, not just asked, but demanded of the PUC that they provide us with a program to improve both their budgeting processes, including implementing new best practices, but also on a separate issue, on the issue of safety, to make certain that they are changing the culture on safety.
Sir, thank you for joining us. He's
welcome.
Richard Bloom. I'm Brad Pomerance. You're watching California Edition.
Californians spend how much money annually for services regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission? Californians spend more than $50 billion every year for services regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission.
Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Stick around because we are going to learn so much about oil drilling, about fracking. We are speaking with Rick Behl. He's a professor at Cal State Long Beach. I am so glad you're here because fracking is a big issue in California. Lots of legislation percolating, if I can use that term, in Sacramento. Could you, for our viewers and for me, tell us exactly what fracking is and how it's different from conventional drilling, if that's the word?
Yeah. So fracking is a technique to get more oil and gas out of rocks that are not easily produced from. And it's a technique that's been around for a long time.
It's not new.
It's not new, but where it's being used and how it's changed and how it's being used is something that is new.
And in California, there's something called the Monterey Shale, and it's actually not in Monterey, it's down in Southern California.
Well,
it's getting a lot of attention.
Yeah. So it actually is up in Monterey. That's why it's got the name.
But it comes down?
But it comes all the way down to as far south as Orange County.
I see.
And it goes inland to east of Bakersfield, and it goes all the way up to Northern California. And in fact, it's related to a swath of really similar deposits around most of the Pacific Rim.
And what do we know about this Monterey Shale? Because apparently the excitement surrounding it is getting to a fevered pitch.
Yeah. Well, it's for a long time been the center of interest for the petroleum industry because it was the source of most of the oil in California. And that oil that it generated, most of it would work upwards into overlying sandstones, which is what they drilled into. And those are what we call the conventional reservoirs that we're asking about. So they're like porous sand, like on the beach that can, you could pour water through. And so you could drill into those and you could easily let the oil, if it had pressure and gas, flow into your well, or you could pump it if you needed to, and you could get the oil out. In certain places, San Joaquin Valley, Santa Maria area, the Monterey Formation itself, where it was very brittle and it was all broken up by tectonic forces and faults and stuff, was also produced from because it had the oil in those cracks and things like that. But much of the Monterey was not brittle enough to be naturally fractured by the earthquakes and such. And yet that still has a lot of the organic matter that with burial turns to oil. And what the geologists and the petroleum engineers and stuff have learned over the last 5, 6, 8 years is that these kinds of rocks that we never could get oil from before because they didn't have enough big pores or open to draw the oil from easily, if they were drilled into in a careful way and they were fractured, then we can get the oil out of these rocks that otherwise would be too tight.
And fractured means?
Okay, so hydraulic fracturing or fracking is an artificial technique that you use after you drill the well to enhance the ability of fluids and gas to get into the well. And so what you do is you take a portion of the well, you seal it off, and then you pump with these trucks with gigantic, powerful pumps. You pump water with some chemicals that help make the water more slippery, and sand into that area so much that it builds up the pressure and it fractures the rock on all around the well.
And that's where the oil comes from.
Yeah, so the rocks got oil in it. But these new fractures now connect all these pores and these little spaces and tiny holes that had the oil in them all together and into the well.
But the concern comes from the chemicals that you mentioned, or is the concern overstated in your mind?
Well, the concern is a real concern, okay? But the fear may be overstated because people just are not familiar and they don't know it. We use chemicals for all kinds of industrial purposes, right? I mean, everything you do, working on cars, making plastics, doing everything uses chemicals, solvents. Some of them are really nasty, okay? Any place that's had a lot of industry, the San Francisco Bay, LA, has had leaks. People put, barrels of solvent somewhere and it corrodes and it leaks and it gets down in the groundwater. And a big part of what we geologists do is environmental cleanup.
Right, of course,
so
remediation.
We go down into those aquifers where water is that are kind of shallow and we're cleaning them up and such like that. Oil drilling is almost always to much deeper depths than the depths that the aquifers that hold our drinking water is. And
Even
so,
the fracking version of oil drilling.
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In most places, it's way deeper, like 5,000,
Beyond,
10,000 feet, a mile, 2 miles.
So what you're saying then is that the chemicals that are used could never legitimately leak into the groundwater?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that it depends upon how careful and safe and what kind of protocols, procedures you have to make sure you do things right. So this is what I am saying. I'm saying that if you are fracturing down in these deep rocks, that water with chemicals is not going to leak all the way up through thousands of feet into a water table that people drink from. But if people spill that stuff on the surface, it goes down just like if I spilled my oil from changing my car's oil on the ground, that can seep on down.
So is that where we need regulation? Because that's what's percolating in Sacramento is at this stage, we really don't have regulations in the state. We have some federal regulations, but what's the agency? Dogger?
The Department of Oil, Gas,
exactly.
and Geothermal
and so,
Resources.
There's a lot of nervousness.
Well, yeah, I mean, so this has become an issue, all right? And it's become an issue because it's become to people's attention, and it's come to people's attention because it's become much more prevalent.
Right.
And it's occurring in areas that drilling activities and production activities had never been before. That's because there's been like a real paradigm shift. There's been a game-changing evolution in our understanding of what kind of rocks we can get oil and gas from. And people don't realize this yet, but this is changing everything. United States is producing more oil and gas than it has for like 20 years.
So could it be that we are heading towards oil independence?
Yes, probably.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Where that was not even considered years ago. And the thing is, it's not because no one thought of that, no one worked on it before.
It's technology.
It's because of, it's actually because of new concepts. It's the science that figured out that these are the kinds of rocks that actually have this oil and gas, and then the technology allowed us to get it out of them.
What's amazing is I was reading an article about you, and in it, the author indicated that the Monterey Shale could have up to 64% of the available oil that can be accessed through fracking. Whether that number is inflated, we don't know. But in the lower 48, there's clear evidence that we have a massive amount.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There are a lot of questions about that need to be tested in different ways. But yeah, the idea is that all these areas that you hear about, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Texas, North Dakotas, things like that, where there's been this great expansion of production of oil and gas from shale rock. Shale rocks means a really fine sediment that was
and
originally
that's Monterey Shale.
That was originally mud and then got compacted and hardened. And all of those deposits, which are very prolific, are relatively thin, like 100 feet of zone that they're interested in, and even less. The Monterey Formation is on average 2,000 feet thick, and in some places it's 8,000 feet thick. But it's more complicated than those other rocks. California always is, right? Of
course.
We're more complicated. We have a lot more variety, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked out. And in those estimates, they're just saying how much rock is there.
I see.
So how much could there be? And what we got to find out is how much of that particular rock is actually the good stuff.
In the final analysis, though, while this is exciting, do we need to head towards some type of regulatory framework?
Oh, I think we have to.
Right.
Okay, I think we have to because this discovery that we can get oil and gas out of these other areas, these shales, means that drilling and production will be going areas that it had never been before, outside of the established oil fields. And so therefore you're having something that's a rather industrial process in agriculture and neighborhoods and stuff, and we've got to figure out how to make that coexist.
I am so glad you joined us. It's a fascinating discussion and one that we really need to get our handle on because like you said, it's revolutionary.
Yeah, it really is.
His name is Rick Behl. He's a professor at Cal State Long Beach. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition.